yippies, convicts, and cops. A lot of times when we were taken over to the federal building in Chicago, Jerry Rubin and I were isolated in a cell by ourselves. This went on for most of the remaining 25 days that Jerry had to serve in jail. We always felt that they were putting us in an isolated tank because that tank was being bugged and they were trying to find out what we were saying or trying to get something so they could misconstrue it and use it against us. They hoped we talk about the legal strategy those other lawyers were using for the defense of their 7 clients. Of course, we didn't. I talked to Jerry a lot about the party. I felt that Jerry Rubin had come to have a more political perspective about the situation. We talked a lot about the yippie hippie movement. I asked him the difference in the names yippie and hippie. He said yippie is the political aspect of the hippie movement, and the hippie is the part of a group that hasn't necessarily become political yet. They mostly prefer to be stoned, he said, but most of them want peace, and they want an end to this stuff. Jerry ran down a lot about the discrimination that goes on with respect to yippies, hippies, what have you, in the same manner it's brought down on black people or brown people or red people or other peoples. And I asked him, why really do you wear long hair? It's a rejection and a way of identifying yourself, he said. When you're wearing long hair and rejecting the system, it causes people to ask questions. What you do is, you become a walking, visible part of the revolution if you walk down the street wearing long hair. If I walk down the street and I've got real long hair, I know that people are asking questions and they're saying things. The middle class world doesn't really understand what is wrong in the system and the corruptness in the system. That is not the way the history books put it. I found out that Jerry Rubin had been a top newspaper reporter for 5 years in Cincinnati. That really got off of me. I really had to think about that. Jerry came to oppose the oppression, the poverty, the fascist tactics that the cops used, and the overall system. He knew that the system needed an overhauling. He knew that some form of socialistic system was going to have to be implemented to really begin to remove the oppressive social obstacles and social evils in the system. Jerry told me he respected Jimmy Hoffa because Hoffa really fought for the workers to have a better life. Hoffa did a lot of things for the workers. I asked him if he thought Jimmy Hoffa was political enough to understand the need for a socialistic system. He said he didn't think that Hoffa was yet, but it would be very good if Hoffa would come around to the side of the masses of people and get the workers to understand that it is necessary to implement some kind of basic socialistic system here in America for all the workers, both unemployed and employed. He really respected Hoffa's past work. I talked to him a lot about black people being a nation within a nation, setting forth to black people that they're a nation within a nation could be misconstrued and shouldn't be misconstrued, not only in words but in terms of deeds and practice. This shouldn't be confused with black racism, and I explained how Chicano and Latino people were a nation within a nation, and how Chinese people were a nation within a nation, and that this is maintained because the exploiting system, which is racist, and the capitalistic system, which perpetuates racism, are really one and the same. As long as it exists, that in itself really defined black people as a nation within a nation, or any other group of people who were subjected to exploitation and racist tactics as a nation within a nation. When I told him that we wouldn't be defining ourselves as a nation within a nation based on color alone, that we would be defining ourselves as a nation within a nation based on the existing economic status of black America, Jerry understood this. Our geographic location here in America, that we are in fact second-class citizens, and that we are scattered in wretched ghettos and rural areas in the thousands and millions, cooped up in these places here in America, also the language of the black community as it is directly related to the colonized situation that black people live in, the oppressive conditions that we are subjected to. All of this, from history to now, is the foundation for our psychological makeup. Our language is interconnected with our environment and expresses certain psychological understanding and attitudes in terms of our attempts to survive. I think Jerry understood the psychology, the language, the economic status, and the geographical locations of Afro Americans here in America. That in fact, black brothers in Africa were our brothers in oppression, but their language is not the same as ours. That we live in a highly technical society here in America, whereas a large portion of Africans live in rural areas and underdeveloped areas in undeveloped countries. That since language and the environment are different, race doesn't necessarily constitute an overall world nation. He seemed to really understand it when I showed him how we were made into a nation within a nation, having been brought here from Africa, and after exploitation and segregation, becoming Afro-Americans. I explained the language to him, showing him some surviving African words and idiomatic expressions, which are directly related to our present situation here. I told him we were directly relating to the fact that racism existing in Africa is quite parallel to the racism that exists here in America, and Marxism-Leninism has to be stretched, and some more progressive ideas have to be set forth in relation to the need to change the system here in America, to show people that black people have a right to our freedom as human beings. Jerry, of all the cats I talked to among the left radicals and revolutionary white brothers, is one cat who I think understood it better than most people. In our general conversation, he was the most political in his understanding. I had never known Jerry Rubin before. I had never met any of the other 7 defendants in Chicago before that Democratic National Convention either. I never even talked to any of them before I came to make that speaking engagement during the convention. In fact, I didn't say any more than "Hi, hello" to Jerry when I went to the park to make that speech. That's the speech that they said was supposed to incite a riot. We have a transcript of that speech, and it was a very typical speech. I certainly never told anybody to go and riot. First, I told everybody they had a right to defend themselves. Second, I told the cats to put their guns in their homes, because they had a right to have guns in their homes, and that we had a right to defend ourselves in the black community if we were unjustly attacked. Those were the kinds of things in that speech. At one point, the DAs, Schultz, and Foran thought that they were going to railroad me on the basis of that speech, by saying that I incited a riot and told people to go out and riot. I oppose spontaneous rioting, and the party has always opposed spontaneous rioting. A spontaneous riot is generally without leadership of any kind. It's just a lot of black people who are ready to resist the system, but who are totally unorganized, and they're only hurting themselves. I told people in that speech that we should organize in small groups, 2s and 3s and 4s, and then went on to the fact that we had a right to defend ourselves when the cops come down into our community and occupy it like a foreign troop. That speech didn't incite anybody to riot. But in spite of these facts, here I was in the Cook County Jail, going to court every day on such an accusation. Every morning at 5 o'clock, they'd get me up and take me to the tank, where I'd wait for 3 hours with whatever federal prisoners were facing court that day. And every day, they'd turn court out and take me back, shackled, with handcuffs on and a chain around my waist. Sometimes they'd handcuff me to another cat. There would be an escort from the federal building to the Cook County Jail. It's about 7 miles between the two places. Sirens would be flashing on the escort cars. We'd be riding in a big paddy wagon, a United States government truck, and they go around all the other traffic. Sometimes they'd have cats in there who had federal charges and had to appear in other courts. When there were escapees, they really put heavy security down, 3 or 4 cars and shotguns. One guard was about 5 feet 8, and he was a fascist-minded fool. We named this deputy marshal James Bond because he carried knives in his boots. He always carried 2 guns, a shotgun, and a .357 Magnum in the escort car, and you just knew he was going to trip over his guns. You could tell he was really a psychopathic pig. When they were transferring us, he would always grab one of those machine guns they have and take this ready-to-fire stance. He was actually a foolish, stupid-looking pig, nowhere near the superficial, untrue movie character James Bond. But you could see this cat must have related to that stupid crap. Sometimes, when they closed the door to the paddy wagon, you could look out the window and he'd take his stance with his shotgun and his .357 Magnum, or his shotgun and his machine gun, and you'd see him trying to get into his car, and sure enough, stumbling over his own guns. He almost dropped one time trying to get back into the escort car. We discovered that he kept knives in his boots because when they come into the prison area with us, the marshals have to give up their guns to the jail sheriff and lock them up. One day we watched from the paddy wagon's window as the cats reclaimed their weapons. James Bond put his foot up on the chair and pulled up his pants leg and stuck a knife into his boot. Then he put his other leg up and stuck another knife into his other boot. He wore a kind of desert boot that came up about 8 inches above his ankles, and he stuck his knives down into them like he had sewed in scabbards down there. A couple of those marshals were fanatics. You should have heard us in prison. We talked about those cats like they were crazy. James Bond was absurd. He was a fanatic with a gun, just waiting for somebody to stumble so he could shoot. Sometimes a cat is shackled. What if he stumbles? This kind of fanatic would think he was trying to escape or something. If anyone stumbled, that kind of fool would shoot up marshals and everybody. That's why we didn't like James Bond. We didn't like that guy at all. A lot of the cats who shared the federal building tank with me after Jerry had finished his 25 days and left were some real out-of-sight guys. They understood in so much detail the corruption in Chicago, from the mayor all the way down, and the corrupt government operations. They told me about some of the slick moves Mayor Daley pulls, such as having 2 houses, one being near or about a black neighborhoods so that people could see him on television going into that particular house, while he actually lived in another mansion someplace else. And the criminal activity in the city was directly interconnected with the government operations on a very large scale, from the way the prisoners put it. The prisoners put forth this kind of information without any hostility, just very factually. It was obvious that they were aware of their own particular predicament, and the predicament of many other people that were being charged. Most of the cats there were very well aware of the things that were happening, although they weren't allowed the city newspapers in jail. There was corruption in Chicago with the judges. A number of judges were forced to resign because of corruption and taking money behind the scenes. Most of the prisoners knew that if you had so much money, you could buy your way out of certain trials and certain kinds of cases for $2,000 and $3,000 and $5,000. And prisoners would explain these kinds of things quite often. When you were getting in a general kind of conversation about what was going on, or when we get in a conversation about Judge Hoffman. Hoffman is known to own some large businesses there, or have stock or ownership of some kind in businesses that actually produce war materials that are being used in Vietnam, which automatically shows his interest in prosecuting and having a biased point of view, completely negative to the 8 defendants, and wanting more than likely to see them convicted. Of course, he would sit up and deny this. This is his public relations front, but he's not much on public relations with his ignorance and his trampling tyrannically over people's constitutional rights. When I was being put in the tank with other prisoners, they noticed something. When the 3 or 4 marshals would come and get me and take me downstairs to court, one of the prisoners was taken out, and he never did return to the tank until I came back after the noon recess to eat a sandwich and the stuff they give you in jail there. This prisoner would be returned just before I got there. Some of the prisoners told me that they could smell a cop a mile away. So, when we were talking, they would say, "Be quiet, Bobby, be cool." They pull me over in the corner and say, "This cat may try to misconstrue something." Then I would say, "They can't misconstrue anything because all I'm talking about is party philosophy and what have you." Then they said, "Yes, but you know what these cats do. They'll jack up one of these prisoners in here, and he'll take some of the things you actually said and then twist them and add some lines on the stand and make it look like you were saying something else. Then they'll have a regular agent who's infiltrating, who'll take the stand and repeat these things and exaggerate even more and tell all kinds of lies. Just because of what you said about your party's philosophy. By their cooperating in lies, they could trick a jury into believing them. They operate that way, so you have to be aware of that." I appreciated this very much from a number of prisoners there. These were all federal prisoners. Many of them were getting big time. One cat there, his name was Bob, he seemed to have beaten some 25 cases in the last 7-8 years. And it tickled me that, although he wasn't political, he always knew what the hell I was talking about. He understood the talk about a basic socialistic system and other things. He got convicted and got 25 years. And they hit him with another charge and tried to give him another 25 years. They say in the federal system, the parole system's just all goofed up, in the sense that if you get 10 years, you're going to do 6 in 3 months. And if you get 50 years, you're going to do every bit of possibly 35 years. These are the kinds of things prisoners didn't dig at all. Naturally, because the federal government has a tendency to snap a whole lot of time to a cat. Another thing that most of the prisoners said was that it seemed like cats were getting picked up everywhere, more so than in the past. People being railroaded. A number of cats, you could just hear their stories and their situations and know they really weren't guilty. Some of them were obviously guilty and showed that they knew this. On the other hand, there's a lot of cats just getting messed over. Criminal activity is so rampant in Chicago on the upper levels, on the political levels, that smaller cats were getting used as patsies and run over. They were being used to save some big-time politician, someone who was connected to the politicians, or the businessmen who were running things and controlling the politics of the city of Chicago. I think that people could learn a heck of a lot from those prisoners who were getting railroaded. There was even a case where both a father and his son were being railroaded on some jive murder beef. People were being used as stool pigeons, being charged with a crime and then offered freedom by the government if they helped convict another cat by getting on the witness stand to lie and say that they saw this person here and this person there, when the person was actually someone that these cats had never seen in their whole lives. It seemed like the prisoners knew quite a bit about when our constitutional rights were being violated. It amazed me the insight they had. It was an experience for me to be able to really communicate with so many cats who were being railroaded in a very blatant way. In that county jail, the brothers need to know a lot. They've got to understand that the power structure is what's messing them up. A few cats who are guards tried to understand me. I gave those cats a lot of respect. The guards who did not try to mess over me. Black guards did not try to mess me over, and I didn't try to mess over them. A lot of them were interested in the Black Panther philosophy. I tried to get 2,000 Panther papers into the jail, but I couldn't. They let the Muslim paper in, and they let the Catholics in to show movies and bring in all their little papers with all the other kinds of religious groups. There was even a school in there for some of the brothers. If they want to go to school at night, They can go to school, which is a positive thing. I felt the cats should also have the Black Panther paper and Soul on Ice. A lot of brothers could get a lot of correct concepts if they had the opportunity and took the time to read the Panther paper and Soul on Ice. Being in jail, they can see themselves as revolutionary politicians, changing the decadent conditions that we are subjected to that caused them to be in jail in the first place and caused the brothers and sisters to be murdered in the first place. But we shall consider them pigs in one form or another unless they are working and relating to end fascist social injustices. Those black guards learned from me, and I learned from them. Cook County Jail is a good place to learn about what it's really like in Chicago. To me, Chicago is a big town with corruption pervading the whole situation, from Mayor Daley all the way down to the pig on the street murdering people. That's the way I describe Chicago. And all the other towns in America where black people live are Chicagos. In 1 month, the police in Chicago killed 80 black people, and that's genocide. Little girls just sitting on the steps doing nothing, just shot down. 80 black people were murdered in the streets. While I was in the hospital in the Cook County Jail, they turned on the television, and I saw this cat who was the president of the Afro-American Patrolmen's League. This was right around the time that the Soto brothers were killed. What happened there was one brother was murdered by a cop while he was walking down the street. It came out as a clear case of a cop just shooting the cat and killing him. His brother came home from the army from fighting for his so-called country for his brother's funeral. It wasn't 3 or 4 days later when he was shot in the back of the head by a cop. The people witnessed the fact that he was just walking down the street, and the cop pulled his gun out and shot and killed him. Another of the brothers was there in the Cook County Jail. I never got a chance to see him, but they told me he didn't get emotional. He didn't crack up or anything. He went about his business. But everybody said they could tell that this brother isn't going to let that go, the way they killed his two brothers. So I was watching this cat on TV, the president of the Afro-American Patrolmen's League. There was another member with him, and they were running down how the racist aspect of the Chicago Police Department had accused them of having membership in the Black Panther Party. This patrolman didn't defend himself by denouncing the party, but instead he definitely went forth to denounce the racist brutality and murder of black people in the black community. He set forth an understanding of the social evils and the social conditions that we are subjected to. Prior to that, the only contact that I had had with the Afro-Americans Patrolman League was when the cats called up the office a long time ago when we were getting ready to implement the community control of police. We had already begun to move the community control of police petition, where registered voters would sign a petition stating the fact that they wanted to have community control of police with neighborhood councils who would do the hiring and firing, and where also this kind of law would be voted on as a yes or no proposition by all the citizens of the city, and where all the policemen would be hired from the community that they lived in. And the Afro-American Patrolmen's League was interested. They were not against this kind of thing. These cats I couldn't and wouldn't call pigs. The party wouldn't call them pigs because, in fact, they are concerned with the people in the community. And that's very significant. Some of the black cops right here in San Francisco call themselves the Officers for Justice. They even have some white cats in their organization. We wouldn't call those cats pigs either. In Los Angeles, there was even one white policeman who quit the police force a couple of years back. He was going to run for DA of Los Angeles County because he was so incensed about operations that were being used in railroading nearly half of all the black cats who were being put in jail. They were actually being railroaded into jail with gross violations of their constitutional rights. But as he put it, the harassment by the racist police and the racist department itself on black people in the black community was worse. I thought of this and the officers for justice, and I was listening to these cats from the Afro-American Patrolmen's League on the television in Cook County Jail. It's very significant that black policemen would come together like that. I see the necessity of even the black cats who are deputies in the sheriff's department out there, regardless of what the sheriff says or the superintendent. I think they should get in the Afro-American Patrolmen's League and be part of it and be really concerned with their community. Most of the black cats in police departments really know that they're just there for a job, but I think that it's necessary that they raise their political consciousness and that of their fellow officers to a higher level, as the Black Panther Party's been trying to raise some gang members' consciousness to a higher political level. It's very necessary because a lot of the cats who are committing crimes are really committing jive crimes against their own people, and they don't have any basic political consciousness. And that's one thing the Black Panther Party's been trying to give to a lot of the cats in the black community, real revolutionary political consciousness. So they won't be running around committing petty crimes. They'll start defending themselves, and they'll find out they're defending something worthwhile. In this way, the black community, the black policemen, and those white policemen who are opposed to racism and oppression should move to expose the racism in the police departments. We really have to give the Afro-American Patrolmen's League a lot of respect for taking that stand.